Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you for a very special edition of the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. There needs to be a time of change, a time of renewal, because there's so much suffering in the world right now. We all need to heal. Now, transformation is constant. Nothing can remain the same. Every year, things are different. Things move forward. Progress happens. And sometimes that's beneficial. Sometimes it's not. Let me direct your attention to my little, here we go, air bubbler here. Do you know what that is? That's my beer fermentor. And those little bubbles are, well, to be honest, they're yeast farts. That's yeast converting the sugars into alcohol. This is exactly what is happening in our world right now. We're all yeast. We're all the same. We're worms, as Winston Churchill once said. But I do believe I am a glowworm. But he hit on the right point. Our whole planet is just like the yeast in that barrel. And we're changing from one thing to another. And eventually, we all die. This is the honest truth. But that day does not need to be today. Suffering is really a matter of perspective. There's different types of suffering, and pain is purely personal. I'm not going to try to differentiate between somebody lying in the hospital hooked up to life support machines who's just gone through, some tragic accident, and somebody whose family abandoned them, their boyfriend or girlfriend just left them, and their favorite pet just passed away. Emotional or physical, pain is purely personal. We're not here to judge that today. We're just going to acknowledge pain and suffering exist. Let's look at these as concepts. What is happening? Let's reduce it to biology. Something is happening, and your body, your aura, whatever you want to bring into this equation, is recoiling from it. It wants to get away from that uncomfortable situation. Just like a fish, people spend so much money on a tropical fish aquarium to make sure the water is precisely balanced and, habitat is right and everything. And the reason is because in nature, a fish would simply move to another place if it was not comfortable where it was. But if we're inside, if we domesticate the fish, then all of a sudden it requires specific skills. It requires specific knowledge and specific materials to keep these fish from Lake Tanganyika, I hope I'm saying that right, in Africa, alive in North America where it's snow on the ground for half the year. Two very different places. But if you notice the reaction I just pointed out, the fish move. It's ingrained in us. If you sneak up behind your cat or dog and you clap your hands together really quick, they're going to get up and jump. They're alerted. What's going on? What's going on? Oh. And that's their thought process, because their natural instinct is identify the threat, react to it, and then reassess the situation. They react when they recognize you. Oh, my stupid owner waking me up. But whereas if a stranger did that, they would quite likely growl to defend themselves or run away, depending on their personality. Again, I'm not going to judge the fight or flight response. It's different for everybody. The point is, all these examples we're discussing are hardwired into us. The back of the brain, the reptilian as it is known, has basically remained the same for tens or maybe even hundreds of millions of years. From crocodiles and dinosaurs to us has the same basic function. And its function is to let us know things are wrong and to keep us alive. Now, scientists are still learning about the brain, so if somebody dredges this up in 200 years and shows how wrong I am, I'm going to apologize now. But according to our current scientific knowledge, as read and interpreted by Silverlight myself, your body is reacting normally to an external stressor, and the mind is connected to the body. They're not necessarily the same things. There is the mind, the body, and the spirit, and in our current form, they're all connected. They're a little triangle. Just like the fire triangle, you have the body, the mind, and the spirit. Minds are usually pretty smart. Excuse me. Minds are usually pretty smart. A mind can say, oh, I got scared there because the car came close to the curb and honked because he was worried he was going to lose control because of rain, ice, whatever it is, and that scared me. But your heart that just got a dose of adrenaline and just got, all your autonomic functions kicking in, is your heart's busy, boom, 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 boom. You're gasping for breath, whatever. Even though your mind knows what's happening, that reptilian part of you is still saying, I perceive a threat. The human mind is a wonderful thing. It's not only capable of identifying threats, but it's capable of making up new environments. Look at Star Wars, look at Star Trek, look at the Marvel movies. Whether you like them or not, a hell of a lot of creativity went into making them. Maybe you're a Stephen King fan. One man's imagination, so many worlds. The problem is exactly that. We're very smart. And that's part of our downfall. Our brains are too smart for our bodies. Our mind is too smart for the body. And we're able to imagine new fears. Just like Alien, Predator, Klingons, what have you. Right now, if I showed up at your house in a Klingon costume, you're probably going to give me some Halloween treats and shoo me out the door. But if I'm hiding in your house somewhere and wearing a dark sheet, one of those night vision kind of things, and I jump out in the middle of the night and go, boo, your system is going to justifiably freak out. How is this linking into suffering? I'm getting to that. See, we're building an idea of human perception. And let's assume right now perception is normal for my listeners who have, bad eyesight like myself or bad hearing. I do apologize, but I'm trying to assume everything is relatively normal. For people with mental illness that are still functioning in society, I salute you. Spiritual sickness, we're going to get to that a little bit later. Or maybe I'll record another episode. Let's see what happens as we're going along. If you notice, as we're going along, our friends the yeast, right there, are still bubbling happily away because their environment is perfectly controlled. It's the one thing that I do have perfect control over. Let's look at suffering. So we've established that it's possible to suffer. Well, everybody knows it's possible to suffer physically. There's no question. Whether you've been stung by a mosquito or you've lost limbs or even worse, everyone can agree that physical suffering is a thing. Whether you want to be philosophical about it and say this doesn't exist, no matter what, if I stick you with a needle, you're going to say, ow, why did you do that? I'm working on establishing mental suffering. And the reaction to that mental suffering is for your autonomic system to kick in. Just like if that car swerved too close to you and honked its horn to get out of the way and you jump back, your mind does the same thing. Just like we can create new worlds and new experiences with just our mind can create new fears, new situations. And it's possible for you not to even be conscious of your mind doing this. After all, have you ever had a dream? Have you ever had a scary dream? Have you ever had a weird dream? Well, these are all your mind creating things in your subconscious. And just because your conscious mind is controlled during the day doesn't mean that the subconscious completely goes away. In World War I, yes, we're going to be covering a lot of ground here, so the prairie dog is out of its burrow, try to keep up. In World War I, you had these farm boys, literal farm boys, who were taken from an existence where maybe they had seen a car, maybe a plane might have flown over on some random excursion, but it was unlikely. They had probably seen a train, but that was the limit of their experience with technology. And these people were shipped to the front line where they had wireless communication, radios, planes going overhead, dropping bombs on them, artillery shells bigger than your body landing all about them. This eventually caused a lot of their brains to shatter, so to speak. The present day we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. Back then they called it shell shock. I think we abandoned the shell shock name too soon. Yes, it does connotate images of a war situation, which is wrong compared to PTSD, which can happen during, sexual assault, during all sorts of horrible things. But the shock part, we really needed to keep that, because your system has gone into shock. Your system has been traumatized so much by what it perceived, be that an airplane going over and dropping a bomb that kills your best friend, be it, let's not talk too much about the tragedy, but your mind, your reptilian brain system, your automatic reaction was your brain to go, and it hasn't figured out how to move any further. I'm pretty sure I've told this story on this channel before, but when Silverlight was in the military, we were shooting mortars off. Those big tubes that you drop a shell in and it shoots out. Well, I'm not going to point fingers here, but one of the other companies on maneuver with us didn't cover their shells down. And overnight it rained, which meant the propellant, the increments, for those of us that know what those are, got wet. So the morning started, the shoot progressed again. It was going fine for the first couple of rounds, and then I heard the sickest sound I ever heard in my life. This kind of chud, which is not what a mortar should sound like. A mortar should be like an explosive kind of sound. Blammo, it goes off, but this chud. And I saw this thing spiraling in the air, kind of like the worst football pass of all time, except it was spiraling to the side. It landed not very far from me. And I'm going to tell you, 3 companies of highly trained, highly motivated, and totally, ready to drop into combat infantry people who just froze up for about, I'm going to say it felt like forever at the time, but I'm going to say it was about 20, 30 seconds before, I believe it was somebody around the rank of sergeant, suddenly his brain popped out of the shock and everybody run, get cover. And everybody reacted instantly like we're supposed to. But for those couple minutes, I knew exactly what it was like to be frozen in time. And I was in a mass incident of it happening. My brain had shut down because what do we do? They never covered this. It was not part of our training. But I have personal experience with a brain shutting down because of overload. Depression, I'm going to be honest, I got experience with that too. Not offering you a magic cure for depression. I don't have it. What I can tell you is it's your own system fighting against you. And don't let anybody talk down to you where they're saying, oh, you're faking it, or oh, it'll go away, buck up, cheer up, like all those. Unless they're meant in a positive way. There are people that say, hey, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be here with you. Supportive people, yes. Accept whatever support they give you. The insensitive people, oh, you're going to be okay, you big baby. Depression, how long are you going to drag this excuse out? No, you don't need that in your life. Anxiety, what a natural response it is for people to feel anxious. I mean, look at our ancestors. They lived on the Serengeti with God knows what predators, but we're talking lions and tigers and bears. Quite literally. Not just the Emerald City, that's in our background. So it's kind of natural for humans to be alert. And it's easy for our brains to get stuck in these patterns of alertness leading to anxiety, feeling tired leading into depression, and shock leading into kind of a shutdown situation. It's natural. As a matter of fact, I would hazard a guess a hell of a lot more people are functionally mentally ill than is recognized. And I'm not saying that to insult anybody, it's just personal experience. Everybody has their private pain. Maybe it's their high school girlfriend broke up with them and they never really got over it. And that's why they go out, drinking every weekend, just trying to null the pain. They might not be willing to admit it to themselves. They might not even be conscious of it. But that's still in their subconscious. Maybe one of their family members is sick. And even though everyone's saying, oh, you're the brave one, and patting them on the shoulder and all that sort of stuff, it's still a lot of stress. When you shoulder the load, eventually you got to put it down and take a break. And our modern society doesn't let us take a break. Here we are, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, unless it's a leap year, in which it's 366 days a year. You've got to be paying attention. I like the fact the Canadian government has put into place this idea of a law that I'm sure is not going to make it into circulation, but I at least salute the idea of it, that when you're away from work, you cannot be contacted. I already know companies are going to break that. Because for certain things, you have to have people on call. They need to be able to go home, shower and everything, but you need their knowledge, whether it's in the transportation field, the medical field, and IT field. There's certain expertise that you need, but you're not really taking time off from the job in that situation. You're worried about it 24/7, and it is stressing you. It's causing that little bit of a stressor reactor. So what's your mind doing with that information? It's kicking it back to the reptilian. It's giving you an autonomic response, which maybe is a little shot of adrenaline that you didn't need. And that's why you're staying up at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking, I got to be awake and ready to go to work in 4 hours. If I just get 2 hours sleep, I'd be happy. If I just get a half hour sleep, I'd be happy. If I just get 10 minutes sleep, I'd be happy. We've all been through that at one time or another in our lives. Our conscious brains are not as smart as we believe, is basically the bullet point of what I'm trying to put here. So what do? Nothing. You can't beat your subconscious. Your subconscious beats you. There are programs, and there are very good programs of both drug therapy and of behavior modification therapy that will help you deal with some of these. But it's kind of, again, we don't really understand how the brain works. So it's a kind of experimentation. Maybe CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, doesn't work for you, but this alternative rational emotive therapy, maybe that works for you. Maybe you don't respond to therapy at all, but you just need to be able to yell at an inanimate object for 10 minutes and punch a punching bag. Maybe working out works for you. Maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe, this line of drugs over here, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Maybe that works for you. There are solutions, but there's no magic bullet. And unfortunately, doctors are kind of throwing darts at a dartboard with a blindfold on. Not because doctors are not qualified, not because doctors are sadistic, but just because our knowledge is not there. There's a recent study that says changing serotonin doesn't do anything as far as depression and anxiety goes. But the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors still work. So there's obviously another mechanism that works, because a significant portion of people do find some relief. Some people find relief through yoga. Some people find naturopaths helpful. Your solution might be anything. And indeed, there are some people that cannot get themselves out of depression, anxiety, the litany of mental disorders out there. Suffering happens. What can you do about suffering? Well, first of all, you can't. Like I said, your subconscious controls everything. But what you can do is be willing to experiment, be willing to keep your conscious mind open, and be willing to stand up for yourself. This is one people don't do often enough, and it's tragic. I see it all the time where people are sitting there, they're at their desk going, oh, there's no way I can get this done. There's no way. Well, maybe, just maybe, this is something that your supervisor should be aware of, that they're overloading you with all these problems. If it's personal, maybe you need someone to listen to you. You need to be able to take your autonomic system out of the equation as much as possible. You can't completely control it, but you can learn to dull the reactions it gives you. You don't want the adrenaline. You don't want the breathing heavily. You don't want your heart racing. You don't want any of that. It's going to happen, but you don't want it. So what's the best way? Like I said, open up. See what resources are available. A lot of companies these days are starting to invest in mental health resources. And I say kind of too little, kind of too late, but something is better than nothing. A lot of companies I know offer a helpline that you can call, and as far as I know, you just talk to somebody, and that's better than nothing. I've always been suspicious of them because I try not to give companies any more information than they need about my life. I like to keep my professional and my private life entirely different. Hence why you know me on this channel as Silverlight. Third persona altogether. Just in case I say something really stupid, I can shut the channel down, go about my life, and be okay. It's one stressor that's not in the back of my mind. It's a suicidal moniker. Now, once you've done that and appealed to your resources, and trust me, everybody has a resource, whether it's a friend, whether it's, there are helplines for people who are mentally distressed. Then we have to start encompassing the whole body system. Your body and your mind need to work together. Suffering happens. It binds the world together. And it's only getting worse as time goes by. Like I said, the pressures on people today are ridiculous. I marvel at the 1950s and 1960s and even the 1970s when people were at work drinking whiskey, smoking cigarettes, taking methamphetamines for weight loss, and all these wonderful things. And they were producing at a pretty darn good rate. They weren't balls to the wall, for lack of better. But at the same token, they were doing amazing things with what they had. Remember, these are the people that came up with the moon landing program, the ICBM, jet planes, all these things came up with people who were whacked out of their mind for the most part. To find somebody who was a teetotaler in those days was almost unheard of. In my generation, I remember having to specify, myself as an adult, having to specify smoking or non-smoking going into a restaurant. And it isn't that long ago. Don't miss it. But that was the way people coped back then. It was a very restrictive society. I mean, LGBTQ rights? Are you nuts? Did you not get the memo at the office? People had to keep their problems bottled up inside. And that's where the notion of A man's home and is his castle came from. Well, no, we live in a society. A person's home should be a place of privacy, of retreat, of a place where you can celebrate other things in the world. But unfortunately, we live in a society. We need to pay our bills. We need to make sure there's food in the fridge. I've always wondered what it would be like to live in an actual Star Trek economy. You just walk over and tea, Earl Grey, hot, and poof, it's right in front of you. Wonder how people would use that. Like, would they become total addicts to virtual reality and be eating steak and lobster every single day? Or would they become more simple-minded and appreciate the life they had? Our work ethic, unfortunately, is geared towards consume more, earn more, buy more, get more things. My darling wife and I have very different opinions when it comes to saving stuff. Now, admittedly, her family was one that passed around secondhand garments and stuff like that. And unfortunately, at my family, it wasn't a thing, not because we didn't have, brothers and sisters and cousins, but because there was such an age gap that there was no point to keeping that stuff around. My cousins were like in their 20s when I was 10, and my other cousin was like 2 in the same time period. So, by the time I passed down my Star Wars shirt to him, then, it would have been horribly mutilated because, that's what kids do to their clothes. But yeah, he probably would have made fun for wearing something so old. Getting back to the suffering, we kind of do it to ourselves because we don't stand up for ourselves, like I touched on earlier. This whole consumer culture, just like in They Live, when he puts on the glass and says, eat more, stay asleep, obey, and all this sort of stuff. That's kind of the message that we're being given. No matter who it comes from, left, right, center, up, down, strange, whatever it might be, it's still the same message. Obey. This is the way we want you to think. And that contributes to a lot of the strange mindsets out there. This whole left and right division that's being pushed on us is incredibly unhealthy. It's dividing families, it's dividing neighbors. And the funny part is, it doesn't do us any good. I would understand it if any of the political parties was actually working towards our interest. But the fact is, they're working towards their own interest. If you happen to be along while they accomplish their goals, good for you, but they're looking out for themselves. But the way it's hyped up, they make you feel like you need to be involved in the conversation. There's a few people that are smart enough to avoid it because they have enough stressors in their life. And believe me, I know. There's enough stressors in the world that you don't really need to go out looking for extra ones. But this illustrates another point about the human mind. So what's the human mind and the human body? So what is this a symptom of, the fact that people are so willing to argue about politics? Well, think about it as when you burn yourself. You get that little welt up with a whole bunch of pus underneath it? Yeah, well, what do you do with the pus? Some people say you need to pop that blister. Other people say no, leave it alone. Do what you will because everybody has a different opinion. But that lets the pressure loose. Either way, whether it goes down naturally or you pop it, and you feel better. And this is a thing we have lost. Again, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, man's home was his castle. In the modern day, there's still a lot of privacy available, but not the same level that there used to be. This is a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is we're catching more people in domestic abuse, in child abuse, all these horrible things. The bad news is we have less ways to have an outlet. I am not suggesting you hit anybody as an outlet. Silverlight has never and will never advocate violence. But, like I was saying earlier, go to the gym, you let some steam off, beating some weights and punching bags and stuff up. People play video games. Well, video games are a good way to let some steam off. They don't physically let any steam off. So we have two different activities that are socially acceptable. One fulfills the biological, the body urge to let off some stention, another new word coined by Silverlight. Punching a punching bag does leave you physically drained, while the video game leaves you mentally drained. But when you leave the other part of the triangle, remember the triangle, the mind, body, and spirit triangle, if you leave that one part of it unbalanced, it's never going to balance itself. So we've created a society where people don't have that balance in their life. They have no way to consistently let out the proper tension in the physical and the mental realm. This is why we're all so stressed out all the time. We get this crap thrown in our face by society, left, right, and center, and there's no way to relieve that tension, aside from maybe a good argument. What's a better argument to start right now than politics? It's also extremely toxic. This is one of the few times I would say, guys, this is just not the right thing. But it's pretty much a meme on the internet that I could post a picture of a hair and somebody would post an essay on why they don't like that hair and why that hair shouldn't exist. We need an outlet. Whether that's a creative outlet where you use all that stress coming in to create something, which I would argue is the most healthy, but is also the hardest. I myself have just come off a bit of a depressive streak where I was really not feeling well. I did not have the energy to put into creation. And it's come back. The fire has come back. Now, the amount of stress in my life has remained the same. A little bit of it has released, and another thing popped up to take its place, which is kind of how life works. Nobody sits around in rocking chairs anymore with a little bit of chewing weed in their mouth and says, "Yep, Vern, this is a pretty good life." No, sadly, society doesn't work like that. But like I said, it's a good outlet. If you want to build model trains in your basement, if you want to knit, I know virtually nobody knits anymore, but it's a pretty cheap hobby. You can buy the materials at the dollar store. Painting is a wonderful outlet, but unfortunately it gets expensive fast. But people aren't giving themselves these outlets, and it's a tragedy. Now, since creativity, like I said, I understand it, it takes a lot to truly do creativity justice. What other outlets do we have? Those are really the three main ones. Exercise, games and similar activities, whether it's bingo, whether it's gambling, whether all that sort of thing, and creation. When you think about it, pretty much every single outlet we have lumps into one of those. Oh, of course, eating. Consuming things, eating. It's all the same impulse. We need to buy, we need to consume, we need to have that, how many mukbang channels are there out there where some person eats all the Doritos in an entire store? I'm not going to criticize them, I'm just saying that's one way people choose to fill that gap is by filling their bellies. It's valid, and if done right, it can be very healthy. Most people don't do it healthy. My wife, wonderful wife, bought a bag of chips. I didn't think they were going to last 24 hours because my daughter and her were staring them up. And I was just like, oh yeah, I just wonder who snaps first and goes for the bag of chips. So a week later, nobody's touched it. Surprised. I haven't mentioned it because the second it enters their conscious mind in it, they're going to want to consume it. And you know what? They both deserve it. I do not begrudge them. It's a point of amusement for me that I can sit back and just say, yeah, they're one of my favorite chips too. And I'm resisting solely so that I can see who breaks first. Otherwise, I probably would have had it by now. See, I'm not better than anybody out there. I'm just offering you an alternative perspective. Now let's look at the classic type A personality. Don't really believe in AB personalities, but they're accepted by a lot of people, so I'll use the lingua franca. Type A CEO kind of person. They've completely abandoned the spiritual side of their existence. Their body and their mind are focused on pushing their business to the next level. There are beneficial examples of this where they want their nonprofit to do more for more people and they push themselves. And then you got people that, they're there for money, fame, and power. And the second they reach the next level, they want to level up to the next one. No judgment. Silverlight doesn't judge. But that's how they fill their holes. They are creating whatever industry that they're in, unless they're caretaking it for a group of shareholders or for an owner who's not somewhere there. They give their lives over to the business. We all know people like this. These people scare me. I'm going to be honest. One of the people I used to work for used to do that. He went 4 years without a vacation. 4 years. Then one day he just disappeared. They found him in his apartment, curled up. Remember the PTSD situation I was talking about earlier? Yeah, exactly like that. His mind had snapped. Now, this is a brilliant man, and he continues to be brilliant. But yeah, that just 4 years without a vacation, being on call 24 hours a day, he gave himself no outlet other than the business. And it cost him. Like I said, he's alive, he's working, he's actually close to retirement age at present, I believe, or hopefully he's retired. I haven't spoken to him in a little bit. Our paths don't really cross. But that's what you can see. On the other hand, there's people who, for various reasons, don't function in a corporate structure. Maybe they're going to be good as mechanics. Maybe they're going to be good as bus drivers. There's lots of roles for them, but they realize they don't want to be doing work. And they work to live, they don't live to work is the expression. And I always remember that in my head. Because you need to have that time with your family, friends, etc. But this can become consuming as well. In the latter days of the Soviet Union and the beginning days of the Russian Confederation, and believe me, I studied this period in economics because it fascinated me, because I was on the other side of this thing happening. People were working just long enough so they would have enough money to go down to the pub, buy some, beer, vodka, whatever it is that they were going to be drinking that day, the cheapest food possible, a little bit of pelmeni, and that was their goal in life. They'd call in sick the rest of the week. That's the opposite extreme. Your classic, well, not your classic, but your type B personality, very laid back, unconcerned with worldly affairs. Most people are type AB. They're willing to come in and give you a decent day's work. They're willing to help out if you need some problems and stuff like that. But they also keep a healthy home life. They're there in the house. And you know these people. I'm related to them. Where their house is immaculate and somehow magically they keep cleaning it despite the fact that they're working and, looking after kids, and basically that perfect Beaver Cleaver type mother. Except Beaver Cleaver's mother, what was it, June Cleaver? Yeah, she has a career and she's still keeping everything magically done. Know people like this. Don't understand them, but I know them. The closest to the middle of that center you find yourself, the better it is. Again, balance between A and B. Balancing yourself is really the key. Now, the problem is when we're off balance, we trigger all sorts of things. Like I said, mental illness can come about. The feeling that you are a failure really is a common factor in almost everybody. Aside from your super type A, the CEO type that we're talking about, and even a few of them are convinced that they are secret failures. This failure illusion, the imposter syndrome, is really ridiculously common. A lot of people take that failure very seriously. I was never particularly popular in high school. I was never, a high-scoring student until I decided in grade 11 that I was going to do it. And, I kind of lollygagged around until I decided it was important enough for me to get into university. That being said, for most of the time, I was screwing around. And most people in their heads think they're doing the same thing. They're a failure because they've screwed around. They lost this chance. Their high school girlfriend left them. All these kinds of things. And it builds up in people's heads. And sooner or later, like I said, you can get that shell shock moment. Not necessarily from being shelled by artillery, but you get that shell shock moment because that something happens that makes your brain freeze. A lot of things can happen during that moment. And having experienced it, I can tell you a lot of things do happen during those moments. You can contemplate your own existence, or more importantly, your own non-existence, and perhaps ways to move towards that. Yes, self-termination. It's not a healthy thing, but it is a thing. People react to it all wrong. It's just trying to think how much I actually want to put on record here. It is a drastic step. And while it's arguably the wrong step, I don't want to make anybody feel bad because that's the decision they've decided to take. They've experienced a trauma. And just like if I grabbed a hammer and hit you in the head, you would go unconscious. Mentally, it's a similar trauma. Your body and mind connection has been broken. Again, we're still not talking about spirit here. That's going to be a whole other thing. But in that moment, your mind can go all sorts of places. And it can go in the blink of an eye. Before you know it, just a second, the thought pops into your head. Well, no, the thought was there. Your subconscious, while it's there to try to keep you alive at all costs, your consciousness can manipulate it and drive it towards some pretty dark places. Self-termination, I have to use that because YouTube doesn't like the other word I used, and I remembered after I said it. But self-termination is really the Thanatos instinct kicked into overdrive. In classical psychology, there's Thanatos and Eros. Eros is the love instinct, the love desire. Thanatos is the fear of death and the desire to avoid it. But some people are willing to push their entire Eros aside, push their fear of death aside and say, I'm done. This is too much suffering, it's too much pain, my mind and my body can no longer handle it. Let's do it. Very interesting story in the local newspaper recently that there was a lady who lived in Ottawa. And she is suffering miserable pain, just miserable pain. And in Ottawa, she qualified for assisted self-termination. But the waiting list was huge. So she came down here and she was almost first in line. I don't begrudge that lady that. In this case, I actually kind of understand with all the things that she had wrong. The poor lady had suffered a terrible life. But there's a big uproar going on about how come our line is so short and why aren't these medical resources being used elsewhere? I'm more worried about the person that said, my life is not worth living anymore. For the vast, vast, vast majority of you, I assure you what life is worth living. There's people you don't know that you've touched their life. And while that sounds like an airy, fartsy kind of thing, trust me, there's people who would miss you. And there's people out there, nobody would miss me if I went. Yes, they would. You don't know. Think about everything that's around you. If you're surrounded by things and you have nothing in your life, the answer isn't self-termination. It's in redefining your life. And it's never too late. It is never too late. I assure you, you can always change your life. I went back to university in my 30s. And it was invigorating to hang around the 18 to 21-year-olds that were in my classes. They were so young and energetic and full of ideas. It gave me enough courage to quit a job that was a toxic culture. And it wouldn't have happened if I didn't change my life and go back to university. I have found myself alone a few times. And I remember the cause of all my relationship failures is me. Because whether I did something that pissed the other person off or whether I got rid of the other person, in my case, the lady, it was ultimately up to me. The lesson from that was to learn to improve on myself. Maybe you're in a bad situation. Maybe you're down to your last $5. Maybe the landlord's going to kick you out tomorrow and it's minus 40 degrees outside. You still can get by. It's going to be tough. I'm not going to lie to you. It is tough. You're thinking, I don't have the strength. You do. I believe in you. And I can assure you, you do have the strength. Because there's the mind, the body, and the spirit. Your spirit is eternal. And nothing can ever harm it. And you just need to learn how to harness that energy better. Your body can be broken. Your mind can be broken. There's places that you can go. There's homeless shelters. There's a Salvation Army, YMCA. There's resources available from almost every single municipality that I have looked up. There's ways to keep your little corner alive. Now, if you're already behind the 8 ball, you missed your first chance. Because your first chance was always, when you see your finances going down the tube, make a play. I've done it a few times. Get on the phone to the bank and say, hey, what can you do for me in this situation? And usually they say, we can offer a line of credit, we can extend this, we can do that, blah, 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 work with it. And it's not going to be successful your first try, but you can usually work, even something as horribly impersonal as a bank, there's ways to work with them. For your problems with the government. Oh, let's try to break that down. Whether you might be in jail and if you're in jail, I don't know how you're listening to this, but welcome on in. If you're in jail, if you're in trouble with family responsibility, please don't forget to check out my book, Family Disservices, that documents exactly how bad Family Responsibility Office and other child support agencies can be for both the payer and the payee. It's a balanced book. It doesn't favor anybody. But they can do all sorts of miserable things to you. Trust me, I know. And it was all because somebody didn't sign one form 10 years ago. But that's a story for another time. No matter what it is, there is help available. It's not going to be easy. Well, it can be easy. You never know your luck. Maybe you walk out, you go to a coffee shop, you meet the right person who says, hey, I know somebody who rescues strays. I'm sorry, I'm going to use that expression because I have a lovely friend. She is a wonderful person, and she's always willing to help homeless people out and put them back on the road. And maybe you'd be lucky enough to bump into her or somebody like her. Personally, I wouldn't do that because I don't have the same street instinct she does. And she can look you up and size you up in a heartbeat and tell you everything about you. Wonderful woman. But like I said, maybe you'll be lucky enough that you'll bump into somebody like that. Maybe you'll just get some information. Even if you have no money in your pocket,